David Adamson. I spent my college summers, and please forgive me for the language that I may use, but going to reservations locally, Yakima, and one up in British Columbia, doing service work. What are ways that I can start to engage my neighbors in where I can actually take action to meet them as hosts, to learn from them?
Yeah. So I'll tell you two quick stories. When I lived on the reservation, we lived there for 11 years, and I would get a lot of groups that would come and say, Mark, how do we come do a mission trip on your reservation? And I got to the point where I told them not to come. I'm like, you're not helping. You know, you're saving the same 3 kids that were saved by the other group the week before. They'll be saved by the same group. The problem is when you come with your team, your 12 people in your little van and your crafts and your used clothing to give away and your dinner for Navajo tacos at the thing, right? I mean, we know what you want, and there's a script, and we're very good at following the script, right? We know how to do it. I said, so you have to find a way to break out of the script. So I would tell teams 2 things. I would say, A, don't come. But we really want to. Okay, well, here's what you do. Get 3 people, maybe 4, and have them make a 10-year commitment. The first year that you come, bring just bags and bags and bags of dirty laundry and sit in our laundromat every day for a week and do laundry. My guess is no one will talk to you. You'll just sit there, and then at the end of the week, you'll drive back with a bunch of clean clothes. Then come back the next year and do the exact same thing. You might sit in silence for a week again. Come back the 3rd year. That year, someone's going to recognize you. Why do you come the 3rd week of every May to do laundry in this laundromat? Your thing says you're from the Pacific Northwest or the Midwest, whatever, right? Why? And they'll ask a question, and you can just answer. We're just here to get to know people or whatever, right? You don't know what to say. They don't know what to say. It's going to be an awkward conversation. End of the week, go home. Next year, come back again. This time you'll probably have a longer conversation. Still awkward, still stumbling, not sure where to go. By the 5th or 6th year, that family will probably not only recognize you, but start looking for you. Might even invite you into their home. Hey, you should come and have dinner with us. We're going to butcher next week, or we're going to do this. And, it's my daughter's kinalta, or there's this celebration going on, or a dance we're having. Come on out for that. And you'll go to that. And I said, by the 10th year, you'll probably be coming with your team and going directly to their house. You'll be spending the week with them. And you won't be that weird team who does laundry from Seattle who's here. They'll be referring to you in familiar terms, in family terms. This is my uncle. This is my cousin. My wife, who's not native, when she moved to the reservation with us, she said, Mark, your people are different because they don't build their relational circles by making new friends. You guys build your relational circles by expanding your family. And I said, I could pretty much guarantee you, if you came with 3 people every year for 10 years, that by the end of that 10 years, you will know at least one family very well, and they will be referring to you in family terms. And it will be awkward. There'll be no script. You'll have offended people numerous times. You'll have gone to bed thinking, why did I say that? Hundreds of times. But you'll have a very real relationship. And that's what I really try. In fact, I tell people, I'm like, if you want to do something, don't do it as your role as the pastor or the elder or the team leader or whatever, because you're only going to be in that role for a little while. And you build relationships through your roles, right? If I go around into the West, into the Western culture, and I ask people to identify themselves, 9 times out of 10, they'll tell me their title and their profession. I'm a doctor, I'm a nurse, I'm a lawyer, right? Who are you? If you ask natives who we are, we're going to tell you what I did. These are my families. This is my relatives. These are my relations. These are who I'm descended from. So we have one group of people that defines themselves professionally, another group that defines themselves relationally. And so you build your relationships the same way professionally. So you'll build the relationship as the leader of the team or the elder of the church or the teacher of the Sunday school class. And then you'll leave that role and you'll try to pass that relationship on to your mentor. Well, that's not how relationships work. That's how positions work, but not relationships. And so you'll think, oh, I built up all this trust so the next person can come in, and we're like, we don't know this person. We don't trust them. We knew you. So I would say build a relationship as who you are, as yourself, as the son of your parents and the partner of your spouse and the father of your children, whatever it is. And then use your personal relationship to introduce us to other relationships within your organization or within your team or within your, but so I really encourage people. I'm like, and if you don't know what to do, like, start there's reservations near most of us. You can usually find out where they are by a casino. If there's a casino, there's almost always a museum. If there's a museum, there's almost always some kind of calendar of events going on. There's almost always a dance or a powwow or something. Find out what that is and go to it. Not just one year, but every year. And go back and then build the relationship that way. So I really try to get people to focus on building real relationships that don't begin or end with your position or your institution. They're relationships you're building for life. And then walk through your life in those relationships. That's a great question. Thanks for asking that.
Over here, you guys, real quick. Okay.
I just want to add to what you were saying. Isn't that one reason why the saying thank you is important? Because it actually opens up a relationship of some, I don't know if you call it, but kind of mutual humanity. And that what's really important is to be able to talk to each other, not knowing what the other is going to say and thinking it's important what the other is going to say, and for there to be mutual listening on a level that it really matters, but that also can open up some very difficult issues because of harm and pain and injustice and even desperation.
Yeah.
And that has to be dealt with if you really are relating to each other. So it takes courage. I think people may need to know what they're getting into if they start that. It's not just nice. It's real work.
Yeah. So I agree. So the question is, does inviting people to come up and say thank you to the grandmother, is that about initiating real relationship? And I would agree. That's exactly what this is. And even when I first wrote that metaphor 25 years ago, I had no idea what the grandmother was supposed to say when that happened. Like, okay, get out of my house, right? I mean, I didn't know what the grandmother would say, and I can't predict or control what different Native nations or people will say, right? It's giving them the agency to say whatever they feel or whatever they want to say. But the thing about the relationship, and this is what's so important. If you follow me online, I host once a week. I have what I call my second cup of coffee, where I sit down and over my second cup of coffee of the day, I talk about the social, political, and religious events of the week, and just kind of change people's paradigm. And about every 10 to 14 months, on my social media and on my second cup of coffee, I have a topic where I just remind people that white people are not superior. And the reason I do that is because we focus a lot of our energy around justice, about talking to the people who are minimized. Black Lives Matter, Native Lives Matter, LGBTQ lives matter, right? We're all free, right? We're all equal, blah, blah, blah. And that's necessary because part of the lie of white supremacy is that one group is less than. But that's only half of the lie. The other half of the lie is that the first group is greater than. And so my goal is I want to have a dialogue at a human level. So if I want to relate to people at a human level, yes, I have to raise up the people who are put as less than, but I also have to lower the people who think they're more than. And this can actually be harder than this. Because when you're used to being treated like this, it feels like people are being racist towards you, or being mean to you, or mistreating you simply because they're treating you as human when you're used to being treated like a god. Yes. And so I again, every 12 to 14 months, I remind people white people are not superior. And just like we have to be intentional to lift up the people from the margins, we have to lower the people who think they're above. And that's going to feel oppressive. That's going to feel offensive, even though it's not. I remember the first time I tweeted white people aren't superior on my Twitter account. Someone responded and said, that's a very racist comment. And I'm like, thanks for proving my point, right? I mean, this is why I have to say it. Because if you think me saying white people aren't superior is racist, you need to understand your framework and your context you're coming from. And so yeah, the goal is to have a dialogue, and this is what's challenging, right? I remember, so when I was running for president, most of the time, again, if white people are up here, the rest of us are down here, a good white person will drop off some charity and then go back, right? A really good white person will come down here and try to lift the person up, right? But the belief is that this is the enviable position. This is where we want to be. Well, this is not sustainable. Even speaking as a United States citizen, right? We are maybe 1/20th of the global population, and we consume more than 20% of the world's renewable resources. If the entire globe consumed like the average American, the globe would be out of renewable resources by like April of every year.
Yeah.
So how we live is not sustainable. And we're aware of that, right? After his presidency, or maybe at the end of his presidency, when President Obama was in Africa talking to youth in Africa, he told them that the world could not resourcefully, with the resources, support all of them having air conditioning and driving a car. He said that. A few months later, he bought a house in the Hamptons, which had multiple air conditioners and several cars. Right? But again, this is where we're like, well, you all can't live. I mean, come on, I can live this way. But the rest of you, and it was such a weird dichotomy of seeing a black man telling other, like, you can't live like me, right? The world can't support this. But then goes on to buy a very large house with a lot of garages in it and everything. And so this is why we have to have the conversation of, yes, we have to lift up the people from the margins, but we also have to lower the people. And these people are often going to be the ones who are going to be like, no, you don't understand. Like, I have to be up here. No, you don't understand. If we're going to be human, we have to interact at this level. So, yeah.
I just gonna ask for the people who are asking questions, can you hold the microphone as close to your mouth as possible and hold it out just like that? That's awesome. Thank you. It makes my job a lot easier.
Okay. I'm Filipino Danish, about your age. The burden of an Asian American is to assimilate which is an impossible task, if younger Charles felt the need to assimilate, or if that doesn't,
I'll say the last one. I missed it because of the mic.
did you need to assimilate into white culture? Did you feel that burden as a young man?
Yes, I felt very much like, well, I didn't feel forced to assimilate because I was raised as a white evangelical. Like that, my grandparents were forced to assimilate. My father was forced to assimilate not because he was taught different, but because his friends and other people were different, and he was only taught English and so on. I was just raised, right? I was raised on a white mission compound of the Christian Reformed Church in a border town to the Navajo Nation, attending a school that used to be a boarding school. I was actually transitioning from being a boarding school to being a day school. I was there as a day school student. There were others there as boarding school students. And so I wasn't being forcibly assimilated. Like I wasn't being told to give up this and do this instead, because I never knew this. I never knew the traditional way of life. But I also wasn't being taught it. Like I wasn't learning it. I wasn't understanding it. And so it was in college that I actually began exploring more of what does it mean to be Native and be a Christian and be a US citizen? Like, how do all these things work together? I began asking questions. I did a study my junior year of college. I studied the Navajo perception of time, and how does our time perception impact our success, our lack of success in large Western universities. Which that study had a lot of implications when I went on to be a pastor, and thinking about what does it mean to contextualize for my congregation, and how does. But so yeah, so I wasn't as much forced to assimilate as I was just raised in an assimilated environment, and was never given the opportunity to understand or know my traditional Navajo culture, even though, and that's the challenge, right? Because my mother's white, my father's Navajo. Navajo's a matrilineal society, and white culture is a patriarchal society. So to white people, I'm Navajo, and to Navajo people, I'm white. And so I didn't really get a deep sense of belonging anywhere, because I wasn't white to my white friends, but I was white to my Navajo family members and my Navajo friends, because of who my mother was. And so it really put me in a place where I was aware I didn't fully belong either, and I wasn't sure where I belonged. And that tended to leave me with, well, I'm either all this or all that, or I'm half. And actually it was more I'm half. And now I'm like, no, I'm both. I'm not all white, and I'm not all Navajo. I am Navajo, and I am Dutch of American heritage. And I actually, because of that, I need to be intentional to invest and to gain integrity within both communities. Because in both communities, I'll be seen as an outsider. So it's made me much more intentional. So we moved back to the reservation. So my kids attended a Navajo immersion school. They grew up speaking the language and learning the traditions and learning the stories and the creation stories, and being exposed to some of the ceremonies and things like that, which I never had. But that was a very intentional choice that we made so that our kids could have that experience. So, yeah, I appreciate your question. Thank you for asking that. Yes.
Hello, hello.
Hi, Mark. First, thank you so much for being here and for giving us this talk. I really learned a lot from you. My name is Jess, and I just want to introduce myself a little bit before I ask my question to give you some context, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So My dad is the first American born in his family. His family immigrated from Mexico. And my mom, her family immigrated from England and Sweden. And I grew up without my mom and with my dad. And my dad grew up at that time in our history when Spanish-speaking children in our school system were treated like special education students and taught
Yeah.
not to speak their language. And really, he really developed shame for his home culture. And when he was raising my sisters and I, he purposefully chose not to speak Spanish with us, not to teach it to us. So I connected with some of what you've been saying about being raised in like an assimilated family.
Yeah.
And my dad also raised us very Catholic. And so as I've become an adult, I've had a crisis of faith when I was younger and really have, tried to learn a lot about our country's history. And I try to have conversations with my dad and still respect him as my elder. And he has very strong beliefs. And as an adult, and having respect for my dad, like I can kind of know when enough is enough and like move on.
Yeah.
But I'm also a widow and have two adolescent children who get very agitated by his, whenever we have conversations with him, because he's always talking about religion, always talking about our, yes, I'm right there. Yeah, thank you. So he's always talking about, his understanding of our country's history. And so I'm looking to you as an elder, and I hope that's not offensive, but wondering if you had any advice for me for how to navigate like helping my children show respect to my dad as an elder and still be able to have conversations with him about these topics
Yeah.
that are loaded.
Yeah, that's a very good question. It goes back a lot to when I was doing work on our reservation as a pastor, talking about contextualizing worship and challenging our people to bring our native understanding of who we are and how we speak and how we view the world into our worship of Jesus. And my biggest obstacles to that weren't white missionaries. It was Navajo pastors who were boarding school survivors. And the challenge these were people who literally were beaten and punished and abused and survived it so they could know Christ, right? And now here's some young kid who didn't go through that, who's saying, well, now if you really want to know Christ, you have to go back to being native and go back to, and I'm like, I realized after all, I was just not in the same violent way, but I was insisting on something that I was causing them to relive some of their own trauma. And so what I tried to do is figure out a way of how do I allow them to be who they are, respecting who they are, but also able to say I disagree. But then how can I create a space where I'm not doing it right in front of them, or I'm not like openly offending them, and I'm educating my kids in a way so that they're not adding to that pain. And so what I would say is I would really try to focus on teaching your kids about what is it your father went through, and not only the sad story about what that was individually for him, but what that meant throughout the context of American history. Like, how did that fit into how this country was formed and how it was made, and how they might even face challenges like that in their own days. And then to talk about this is how your grandfather survived that, or how he made it through that, but it's also caused these wounds in him. And so, you know, my wife and I were fairly intentional with our kids, where a lot of parents protect their kids by not being completely forthright about the history of the country or the harms of the family and stuff like that. And my wife and I were much more intentional to just be honest with them of, hey, this is what happened, or this is what took place, or this is what it was, so they could begin to wrestle with that, right? So we never believed in Santa Claus, right? We never, I mean, we were honest with them about what was real and about what, you know, didn't let them believe something that might not be true. And so we could deal with it and talk through it and just be honest and be straightforward about those things more. And so I think that's where what we did with our family is we tried to have as frank or honest conversation with our kids as we could, so then they could partner with us in engaging in those dialogues without causing more harm. But also, you know, I also was like, yeah, I'm not going to just, I recognize the hurt these elders had been through, but I'm like, I'm not going to let you perpetuate that. You're not going to be the one, you know. And I remember this very clearly. I'll just give you this example. I was it was our classes meetings for our church, and they were interviewing lay students who were getting the licensure to exhort, to preach in our churches. And they were asking them all of their questions, you know, and most of the people asking the questions were our native pastors. And there was one woman who was being examined who was more traditional than everyone else on that in the examination. And one of the more traditional pastors asked her, he said, okay, if your family is giving a ceremony and they ask you to help out with the ceremony, which is what families do, and they chose a ceremony that they knew would be theologically a problem within the church, and they ask you to participate in this ceremony, what do you tell your family? Right? And the correct answer is, I'm not going to participate. Right? And so they asked her that question publicly, and she had to pass the examination, tell this Navajo pastor the same thing he had to tell the white missionary, which is, yeah, I would not participate in that ceremony. I'm sitting in the back, I'm livid. I don't want to disrespect this elder, but I also don't want to have another generation harmed and being forced to do the same thing that happened. And so I'm like ripping my hair out. And so after that, they opened up the mic so anyone in the audience could ask a question. And one of the elderly women, again, traditional Native woman, Navajo woman, stood up and she said, I liked that question and I liked her answer. I want all the rest of them to answer it too. So they all had to go through and denounce their culture now and say, I would not do that. And again, so I went up and I grabbed the mic and I said, okay, I don't care what your missionary would have done. I don't care what the teacher would have done. I said, we all know Jesus didn't have a hard time doing things that he wasn't supposed to do. He ate with tax collectors. He hung out with sinners. He, did all these things. I said, so I don't want to know what your elder would have done. I want to know what your missionary would have done. I don't even know what you. I said, I want you to know, what do you think Jesus would have said if your family came and asked to help out with this ceremony? And because of the way I set it up, everyone said, well, I think Jesus would help. And so again, it was a way to help people understand, yeah, I'm not talking about pleasing the person who beat you. I'm not talking about avoiding, I'm talking about this character named Jesus, who we all know did things that offended the leaders of his day. And how do you think he would interact in this situation? Would that be different than how the white missionaries interacted? And afterwards, one of these elder pastors came up and thanked me for my question and said, I appreciate you finding ways to engage on these topics with us. So yeah, so that's the way I would try to go about it. But I recognize it's a very difficult dilemma. And especially when you're dealing with multiple generations and you don't want to offend, but you also want to pass on baggage to future generations. So thanks for that question.
Hi.
Yes.
My question, can you hear me? Okay. My question adds on to your answer about getting to know Native Americans on a more one-on-one or personal basis, like you mentioned before. Given that my white society meets the Native American society on a largely commercial basis, the outlet malls, the casinos, the food trucks, and we don't go beyond that generally. If we were to go beyond that, like you suggested, would we be welcome? Or are we going to be seen as spectators and not part of the community? And sort of like white folks watching a Wild Bill Hickok show at a powwow.
Yeah.
Is that how we're perceived, or is that something that, hey, come on and join us? Is that going to be okay?
And that's going to be the danger, right? Is because there's a script, right? And it's easy to fall into the script, right? So you go to the powwow, you buy the jewelry, you buy the fry bread, and you just do the thing, and then you go home. And that's where what I tell people is one of the most important things you could do in that situation is to go back, and to go back frequently, and to go back in different manners, right? So don't always sit in the same place, or, don't always order the same thing, or, and go back not in a professional or in an institutional role, but go back in a relational, in a personal role. And if you go back and if you seek to build relationships, and if you're able to laugh at yourself and mistakes you're going to make, because we will laugh at you, right? But that's a part of our culture. It's not the mocking sort of laugh. It's like, this is it's ways we interact a bit differently. But if you're able to go back and have a sense of humor about it, but also to be humble about it, that is what will be noticed as different. And it's when you break the script, because when we know there's a script, we will follow that script very well, or we'll break it very intentionally. But when you come in a way that's respectfully not following the script, it's going to force us, I would say, to actually step outside of the script and interact in a more real human way. And that's where it's going to get real, right? That when you're interacting at a human level, that's not scripted, but you're both just being who you are. That's where real relationship gets built. And that happens over time. And so that's where I would say, yeah, go back and work at it. Go back and think, when I do the same thing when I talk, like after I talk, and especially when I first started speaking and teaching a lot, I would sit down with my wife or with family members who were there, people who saw me, and say, okay, you knew what I wanted to say when I got up. Did I say it, right? How did I communicate? I'm not necessarily caring how they responded. Did I say what I wanted to say? Did I communicate the intent I wanted to communicate? And what can I do to change it differently next time? So if you want to go into a place relationally, right, when you leave, then ask yourself, or even ask people who you know to gauge you, hey, was I relational there, or was I more institutional or professional? And how did I do it stepping outside of my comfort zone? And it's going to be something you're going to have to work at. And that's where going back and doing it over and over again is going to help. I appreciate that question. Thanks for asking that. Yes.
Hello, hello. Uh, Quick questions. First, you can be reached at wirelesshogan.com for future contact.
Yes, there's a contact me page on my website, which is wirelesshogan.com. There's a bunch of bookmarks in the back. If you pick up that bookmark, there's a QR code on the back. There's a lot of my resources, videos I've made. You can buy signed copies of my book there. And you can get to my website, which is where you can find the contact me page to get a hold of me.
Great. And the other thing is your book. Can you tell us?
Yes.
Hold it to your mouth like out.
Okay, but okay. Also, please tell us about your book. You mentioned it briefly, but I'd like to learn more about your book.
Yeah. So On Selling Truths is the book that I wrote. My co-author's name is Soong-Chan Ra. He's a professor now at Fuller Seminary. He was writing a book on lament, and I was traveling the country talking about the doctrine of discovery and calling the church to lament. We got to know each other really well, and we decided to write a book together, and this was the book we wrote. I love this book. A lot of authors hand me their books and say, this is the book that got published. It's not the book I wrote. The editor changed it. They took things out. I can tell you with 100% certainty, this is the book Soong-Chan and I wrote. And the reason it's that book is because he did a fantastic job of pre-editing it for us before we even sent it to our publisher. So our publisher had no problems, believe it or not, with almost everything we wrote in here. But the book is, and we were writing the book. We signed the contract to write the book in 2015, and we published it in 2019. And so we didn't even start writing the book until 2017. And we had the thesis all written out. We had it all paved, the Doctrine of Discovery, what we were going to do, how we were going to cover it. And then it was going to be a call to lament. And then we elected Donald Trump as president. And Soong-Chan Ra and I got together a few days after that election and realized that we needed not to write a book calling people to lament, but we needed a public rebuke of the church. Because it was the church, by and large, that elected him in 2016. And so On Selling Truths is a public rebuke of the church. It is us telling Western Christianity that you are not God's chosen people, and Turtle Island is not your promised land. And we go through, we talk about the doctrine of discovery, what it is. We talk about how the church got from the teachings of Jesus to a doctrine of discovery. We talk about how the doctrine of discovery influences our foundations, our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, and the Supreme Court cases. We talk about how it influences the history. We talk about how it influenced Abraham Lincoln and the 2 chapters on Lincoln, which are probably the 2 most challenging chapters to read in the book. And then we end with something I didn't even really talk about here tonight, which is trauma. The chapter right after the chapters on Lincoln, chapter 11, is on trauma. And I share a lot of my own personal story where I was the driver of the car. I had a car accident when I was a senior in high school. My brother was in the car with me, and he died in that accident. And I tell about my story of recovery, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally, from being the driver of the car that killed my brother. And so we look at how trauma, whenever I say trauma, most people think of what's called PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, and which is a very real way of trauma. It comes from a single horrifying event. It affects you mentally, physically, emotionally, and relationally. And then there's a thing called, and that can go to another form of PTSD that is generational. And then ultimately you get to historical trauma, which is communal. But then we also look at what I call the trauma of white America, and some research done by an author named Rachel McNair, who wrote a book called Perpetration-Induced Traumatic Stress, or PITS. And she's writing about the psychology of killing. And her question is, how, when society gives you the right to take a life, what does that do to you psychologically? So if you're a doctor in certain medical fields, if you're a soldier, if you're a police officer, even if you're just a good white guy at the mall with a gun, and society gives you the right to take a life, what does that do to you psychologically? And she found it causes what she calls a perpetration-induced traumatic stress, which has all the symptomatology of a PTSD, but PTSD affects the victim, whereas PITS afflicts the perpetrator. And so we have a whole chapter on how white America is struggling with the multi-generational communal manifestation of a perpetration-induced traumatic stress, which doesn't justify their history, but it does explain their bizarre reaction to their history. And it helps us. And so I prepare for my audiences. I prepare for my audience of color by understanding their PTSD and their historical trauma. And I prepare for my white audiences by understanding their perpetration-induced traumatic stress and what I call the trauma of white America. And so, and then we end with we talk about lament, but we really end with the challenge of this is that whether you're on the left or the right, whether you're a conservative or a liberal, Christianity in the United States is about trying to make the nation more Christian. And the United States of America is not, never has been, nor will it ever be. It was never it's not the goal to make it Christian. You're misreading the scriptures if you think the goal is to make it Christian. And so it's a rebuke of the church. And the book has done fairly well. It has sold about 35,000 copies, so not a bestseller, but better than most books. It's sold fairly consistently. A lot of books will sell high for the first month or two and then drop off. And our book had a slower rise, but it stayed really steady for a very long time. In fact, even today, it's still selling fairly decently. It's in like its 11th or 12th printing. So it's done really well. I've been very pleased with, it's a bipartisan critique. We don't, if we wanted a bestseller, I would have attacked the left and triumphed the right or vice versa. But because we critique both sides of the aisle, they both hate us. And so no one buys the book, or not no one, but only 35,000 people instead of 35 million. And so it's a challenging book, but I feel really good about it. And it's been 6 years now. And I still sell copies on my website every day. I get people who talk to me about the book all the time. And I feel like even in the era now of Trump and what we're doing now, not just Trump, but Biden and where we've been for the past 8 years, the book is still very relevant. So on my website, I actually sell what I call my book study special, where if a group buys 10 copies of my book for the sake of a book study or a class or a Sunday school class, I will give their study a 45-minute virtual Q&A that they can schedule with me up to a year after they buy the books. So yeah, so I've really enjoyed writing the book. I enjoy promoting the book and talking about the book. And I feel like it started a lot of really good conversations around the country. So thanks for letting me talk about it for a little bit. Yeah, I used to travel with it a lot more, but it's the challenge with when I travel with it is I have to basically set up a business in almost every state and then charge tax. And then I have to keep that business open for like a year or 2 years at a time. And I have to file every month or every quarter. So it's a lot of logistical work. So it's a whole lot easier if people just buy it from my website and then I can sell it to states, but I don't have to set up a business in that state. And it just is so much simpler. So on my book, you can get a bookmark in the back, and on that bookmark is a QR code. And on that QR code, you can get it to my website, and you can buy signed copies of my book. And I'm not even charging shipping right now. So you can get you get it for the same price you got it had you got it tonight. It'll just come about a week later. But you can buy those on my website. So thank you. Okay.
Got one too.
All right. Okay. Oh, where's the mic at?
Here.
Okay, my question is this. We're in 2025. E-commerce is driving massive amounts of communication that is exponentially powerful. How can we accelerate what it is that you're saying into the market in your mind that would actually help us deal with the shock of learning that America is not what we thought it was, and the trauma? I find it interesting. Shock and awe was what was used a few years ago when they attacked a country.
Yeah.
We're dealing with complex compound trauma and exponential power. How can we best help you?
So yeah, that's a great question. I have been banging my head against the wall for the past 20 years, trying many different ways to engage this content at a national level. I ran for president in 2020. I hosted a reading of the apology signed by President Obama for Native peoples in 2012. I have served on the boards of many organizations. I have written op-eds. I have a fairly successful, fairly well-viewed TEDx talk out there that has got a lot of views. If you Google my name, you'll find a lot of videos out there. And so I tell people I'm the most famous person you've never heard of. So in some small niche circles, like I'm a rock star, but most of the country has never heard of me. And the problem isn't promotion. The problem is our country doesn't know what to do about the things I'm talking about. Right? It's like if I was just attacking Trump, great. Let's vote him out of office. If I was just attacking Biden or the Dems, great. Let's just keep them sidelined right now. But I'm saying, no, the problem's our foundation. And nobody wants to talk about that, right? I mean, this is why we elected first one guy who said, well, maybe we shouldn't choke people. No, first we elected the guy who said we should shoot people in the kneecaps instead of in the chest. And then 4 years later, we elected the guy who said, well, let's just maybe not choke everybody, right? And those are the people we elected. And so and now we're, anyway. So yeah, so it's, the challenge is I am working very hard to try and figure out not just what's the best way to promote it, but what is the best way to engage the dialogue. So the thing I'm working on right now, this is my latest cutting edge attempt. I am refining this talk. And you know, this talk went a little long tonight. I believe I can make this talk more concise, and I think it has the potential to really grip people. So I wrote on Selling Truths. My next book is called Decolonizing Faith. My third book on the health content is going to be called Decolonizing Health. People who work in the publishing industry have told me, they said, so on Selling Truths sold 35,000 copies. I told my Decolonizing probably do better than that. But people have told me what I'm working on, that could that could put me on the map, potentially. And so I'm working on those things. But the other thing I'm doing right now is I'm trying to weave comedy through my presentations and to see if I can use a comedic thread. So I'm working on a presentation on the Lincoln content. where I go through, and I have a lot of content on Lincoln, more than I only scratched the surface tonight. But I have a comedic thread that I'm working through that entire thing that gets people laughing as well as crying and screaming at the same time. And my goal is I want to take this talk I'm giving here and the talk I'm giving on Lincoln, I'm preparing on Lincoln, and I want to engage that at a national level. And the question I'm asking with Lincoln is not just look how horrible Lincoln was. What I'm really getting at is what does it say about us as a nation that this man, who I can make a direct comparison to Hitler, and if you know the facts, you won't bat an eye. And this is our greatest president. What does that say not only about him, but about us? And so that's what I'm working on right now, is I'm trying to find, without softening the content, without making it just easier to digest, but how can I present it in a way that really makes people deal and wrestle with it so that we can get to that conversation. If I water it down or promote it too much or oversell it, then I'm not going to get a real conversation. So that's the nut I'm trying to crack. And one of the reasons I'm doing this tour right now, I'm calling it a Common Member Tour, and I'm funding it through GoFundMe. And I'm doing it that way because right now, so many institutions and churches and organizations are afraid to host events or pay for events about these topics because of what could happen from the Trump administration. So my speaking invitations have literally shriveled up to almost nothing. But I find the public still really wants to engage with it. And so I'm doing this tour and I'm funding it through GoFundMe. So I don't have to say to an organization, not only will you host me, but will you fund me and pay several $1,000s to travel me out there and then to pay an honorarium. So I'm saying, okay, let's not worry at all about the funding. If you have money, that's great. Can you at least just host me? Are you willing to stick your neck out enough just to gather some people? And then we'll come in and create the dialogue. And if you have money to pay, that's great. But if not, don't worry about it. There's other places we're getting some of that funding from. So I just want to continue to press the conversation forward. So that's what I'm working on right now. And I'm hoping at the end of this year, early next year, I'm going to start doing the same thing with my Lincoln event and start taking that around places. So that's what I'm currently working on. And so funding that type of work that's the more I can get this out and just engage it with people. I think that's what I'm currently working on. I appreciate that question.
Thank you. And I intend to support you in getting that done. And I think that we need to take really rapid action in the Pacific Northwest because we're at the Saley Sea and we are in a critical time right now at the border because of the Peace Arch and because of the fact that we are dealing with real issues in this state that Trump wants to turn this into another prison colony, and we have an opportunity to change it. Please pay attention to what he's talking about. This is good work. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe one or two more questions, and then we should probably here, and then there's one back there. There was one here and one back there.
I have a mic if you want me to ask it for this. I'm curious about your you talked a little bit about the book has this book that you're promoting now has came together in the last 10-ish years. And I'm curious the content of that book and this talk, where was that like placed in your experience of it throughout your life? Was this something you talked about how you were raised white evangelical? Was this something you struggled with in your 20s or your 30s? And like, what was also the cultural conscious or context of the United States at that time?
Yeah, so I was born in 1970. So it was in college I began to really wrestle with some of this content. So I was in college in the early 1990s. And that's when I began to wrestle with some of my own identity as a Navajo man. What does it mean to be Navajo? I did this study on time perception. And then after college, I worked in a Christian campus organization with Native peoples. And then I went on to pastor a church in Denver called the Christian Indian Center in the early 2000s. And that's when I began wrestling with issues of contextualization. I began meeting with Native Indigenous Christians from all over the world about that same time. But it was really, it was my work with the Christian Reformed Church, and we were working with some of the church in Canada to talk about the doctrine of discovery. And my father first began pushing me to understand more about the doctrine of discovery. And I was helping the Christian Reformed Church kind of contextualize this Canadian content about their history for the US context. And I wrote an article in the, I don't even remember, early 2000s, I think, where I was putting some of this content together. And it was the first time I even raised the possibility of, I went through the history and I talked about the need for some kind of a dialogue. And that was the first thing I ever wrote that kind of went, I don't know if viral is the right word, but it got my name out there pretty far. And I started getting calls and phone calls and emails from people wanting me to come and speak and talk about these issues more and more. And so, yeah, this was never my goal to go into these things, but with every step we took, moving to the reservation, living with the families we lived with out there, raising our kids in the immersion school, and now we live in Washington, D.C. You know, we're kind of in the middle of all this stuff going on. So it's been very much an on-plan progression. And if you would have even told me in college I would be doing what I'm doing today, I probably would have laughed at you, not even expecting half of this to come close to what I wanted to do. But it's been something that has been incredibly rewarding. And I find myself now, I think it struck me just a few, like in the past year, I recognized, so what I'm doing right now, I'm writing books, I'm speaking, I'm doing some coaching, a little bit of consulting on these types of issues. I have a podcast called My Second Cup of Coffee where I talk about these issues. And I write some op-eds or some other articles every now and then. And I realized about a year ago, I'm like, I'm doing what I expect to do until I die. Right? Like, this is it. And I so love my life right now. Like, I love the things I'm working on. I'm trying to figure out how do I do these things better. But the things I'm engaging in churches in front of audiences of 20, 30, 40, maybe 100 people at a time, I would love over the next 10 to 15 years of my life of being able to engage these kind of dialogues in bigger and bigger venues and with more and more people. And to really try, my goal is to start a national dialogue, right? I want to have these types of conversations throughout our nation, not because I've gone viral or I'm a New York Times bestseller, but because we're talking about these things at so many different levels and from so many different angles that people have to be exposed to them. I think one of the best reviews I ever got of my work, someone was writing a review, they were commenting about me on social media, and someone mentioned they had heard me speak. And this guy responded, he said, "Oh, yes, I heard Mark speak." He said, "Listening to Mark Charles is one of the hardest speeches you'll ever sit through, but you'll come out at the end feeling more human than you've ever felt before." And I heard him, I read that, and I don't remember where I read it now, but I'm like, that's what I want, right? I want to help connect people not only to their own humanity, but to the humanity of everyone who's sitting around them. And then to have that energy to say, yeah, we can do better, right? We can find a way to do better. And so I love this kind of work. I love the things I'm doing right now. It's not something I ever intended or planned to do. I worked as a computer programmer for a number of years. I've been a pastor for a number of years. But what I'm doing right now is what I've enjoyed immensely. And I'm looking forward to doing it for a real long time yet. So thanks for that question. Okay, last question.
Okay, yep.
I
Is
see.
this working?
Yeah.
Okay. One part that I was particularly struck by from your lecture was when you said that for there to be conciliation between native and non-native peoples was how uh, non-natives, mainly whites, would express a sort of gracious humbleness and say, thank you for letting us be in your home, letting us be on your land, and that natives should, embrace their roles as, inviting, open, gracious house guests. Um, that struck me because it sort of seemed like, well, okay, maybe in practice, not everyone will respond that way, but if they did, it's like, okay, great. The historical oppressors give their humbleness and gratitude, and in that sense, open their hearts, and the oppressed peoples, um, react in a way other than just angry retribution forever. So that's conciliation, if I ever heard it. But then I thought about it in terms of the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is something that my family and I think about quite a bit because we have Jewish background. We come from Holocaust family, and they at least have known people in Israel. And we've also had to, think a lot about that issue over the last couple of years and, reorient our minds in terms of, what's really, a fair way to end this whole thing because it's really terrible, everything that's going on there. Basically, what I'm getting at is when you have a place where there's, two peoples with, long, strong historical connections to the same land and the same place, it's, at least for me, it's not as clear cut who should be thinking themselves as the the guests in the house and who should be thinking of themselves as the hosts. In a context like that, do you think the host and guest paradigm is the right paradigm to have in a case like that, or do you think a different paradigm is needed? And if so, what do you think that would be?
Are you talking in Israel or here?
Israel and Palestinian territories.
Yeah. So, so I didn't go into my full critique of what's going on in Israel and Palestine. I've spent significant time in Palestine as well as in Israel. I've talked with Palestinians, I've met with Bedouins, and I've been within the Jewish community in Israel as well. And so I'll say two things. One of the most significant conversations I ever had with indigenous peoples was with a man in Palestine. And we were walking up to his house, and he was an elder. And he said, "This is my hill." He said, "Everybody on this hill knows me. My family has lived on this hill for 2,000 years. This is my hill." when we were going through one of the security gates and there were guards at the gate at the wall. And there was some question if one member of our party was going to be able to get through because they may not be allowed through that gate. And he said, no, you can go. This is my hill. He said, these guards have just been here for a few years, that they're going to come and go, this is my hill. And it blew me away how someone in the midst of not just chaos, but armed guards and violence is like, no, those things are going to come and go. This is my hill, right? This is where I'm from. This is where I live. One of the things I tried to do, I spent significant time with the Bedouins there. And in what I observed was the Bedouins were some of the real pawns in that conflict. And I always bring them up because when the Palestinians take over a piece of land, they move the Bedouins. When the Israelis take over, the Jewish settlers take over a piece of land, they move the Bedouins. The Bedouins have almost no political power and they get moved all over. And we sat with the Bedouins for a while. And it took, I was living on the reservation at that time. It took me a long time to convince them that the way we live was very similar to the way they lived on our reservation. Including no running water, no electricity, right? We literally were living in a hogan at that time. And so I always try to bring them because that throws people in the conversation. Because everyone knows about the Palestinians, everyone knows about the Jewish settlers. No one knows about, not no one, but very few people know about the Bedouins and what's really going on in their lives. And so I throw that in to make it even more confusing for people. And then in light of what I talked about tonight, in my book, I talk about the trajectory from creator to king. And the further the character God gets from creator, the closer the character God gets to king, the more violent, the more vindictive, the more nationalistic, and the more abusive that God becomes. So much that in the Psalms, right? Well, I'll give you two examples just so we're clear, right? So creator, and most indigenous peoples have a flood narrative. And there's a flood narrative in Genesis. And I would imagine how my grandparents would have heard about this flood narrative, because when I read this after watching the sunrise for 25 years, I read the flood narrative in Genesis. I'm like, yeah, that's not creator. Because creator looks down and sees the sin of people and decides, screw it, I'm going to kill everybody. And then creator picks one family and has them make a boat. They get to watch everyone else die. At the end, after everyone's died and they've been saved, creator puts a rainbow in the sky, right? What does the rainbow symbolize? Never do what again? No, that's not what the promise is. What's the promise? No, never destroy the earth with a flood again. Okay, so let's pretend we have a room full of young people and they're acting violently and abusively towards each other. They're hurting one another and they're doing damage. They're kids, right? And the parental figure comes in and grabs a bat and just beats the crap out of these kids. Kills some of them, wounds several of them. The ones that survive, right? This parental figure gets a beautiful picture and puts it over the door and says, this picture is to remind me never to beat you with a bat again. Who's comforted? That's not comforting. Why? Because the problem's not the bat, right? The problem is the violent, vindictive behavior of this figure. So in the Psalms, we have the psalmist crying out to God to do what to their enemies? Destroy them. We have the psalmist praising this when God does what to their enemies? destroying them. So in the Psalms, we see love being defined as violence. Only one group of people sees violence as love. It's people who have been groomed for abuse. It's the only group of people who see violence as love. Now, the problem is this trajectory from creator to king takes place primarily in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Our first Samuel is where it actually defines God as king, but the trajectory is already there by the time you get to the end of Deuteronomy. And there's 3 religions that hold these scriptures, these books as scripture: Jews, Muslims, and Christians. Right? So they all, at some level, accept as scripture this trajectory of creator going from creator, of the divine going from creator and becoming king, and becoming increasingly violent, vindictive, and abusive throughout that trajectory. So in Israel right now, right, we have a problem. We have a war of 3 nations: Hamas, Israel, and the United States. Hamas has nationalized Islam. Israel has nationalized Judaism, and we've nationalized Christianity. And all 3 of us are using our religion to justify unspeakable violence against our enemies. This is an incredibly dysfunctional situation. And we, and by we, I mean the United States of America, somehow think we're the voice of reason in this debate, right? Which we're not. The last person you want mediating a debate about nationalistic violence based on religious ground is a white landowning man. And so it's like, yeah, we have to, the challenges going on there are so not only deeply complex, but deeply personal for us as well as for the groups there, that there has to be some other kind of outside mediation going on there, not by anyone from the Abrahamic religions, but probably by some indigenous people who have different accounts of creation and different trajectories of the divine and different ways of relating to and understanding and treating those things. And yeah, so I'm like, the challenges that we're facing in Gaza and in Israel right now, the United States of America is not the voice of reason in that conflict. And we are not going to bring peace. The best we can do, the best we can hope for is Trump's resort town. That's the best we have to offer as a nation. Trump wants to build a resort in Gaza. That's the best this nation can do. Which is it's a horrible idea. Absolutely dehumanizing. But that's the best America has to offer. Not America, the United States of America has to offer. And so, yeah, so I don't have an answer for you, but I think as I've spent time in Israel, it was actually my Jewish friend who gave me some of the healthiest perspective on the Old Testament text that I've ever had, where he challenged me. He said to me, Mark, as an American, you've been trained to read these texts like they were written to you, and they weren't. They're not your texts. These are the texts of the Jewish people, and they believe it's written to them. And they're not written to you. They're not written for you. You can't claim these promises. You can't, right? They're just not. And that was actually, it was him who got me started reading the Old Testament as an outsider, not as an insider, which completely changes your perspective on it and gives you a lot more interesting perspectives on it. But so yeah, so I'm not gonna pretend to have the answer to there yet. Because I would say, and I may, maybe I shouldn't even say anything because I don't know enough about the late history. But even Israel's presence in Israel goes back to the ethnic cleansing and clearing of Canaan, right? I mean, that's their original claim there. And so I think we at least have to, I think we need to have a much stronger critique of the Abrahamic religions. And what is it about these texts that have been used for so many years by so many people in so many different religious traditions to justify such unspeakable violence against one another? And I think that's the question we should be wrestling with more. Because right now, these two groups that essentially believe in the same God are killing each other because of different interpretations of their very same texts. And so, yeah, but America is not going to be the voice of reason in that. We need to bring in someone else, anyone else. A 5-year-old could do a better job, I think, of mediating that than a white landowning male from the United States. But I mean, I have thought about it would be good to bring indigenous peoples into that dialogue because it would bring such a different perspective that's not rooted in those same texts that have been misinterpreted and used to bludgeon one another for so long. So I think bringing in some other kind of perspective could be very, very helpful in that process. So I appreciate that question. I hope I didn't confuse it, but yeah, I appreciate your question. Well, thank you, everybody. This has been a lot of fun. I really enjoy your ability to stay engaged with this and to have these conversations. Yeah, thank you all for coming. This was a lot of fun tonight. So yeah, my relatives.
Don't feel any pressure at all. And talk, because I have it, if I don't know who it is, I listen, if nobody connects, I block it. So,
Okay,
or text.
I'll text you.
And if that doesn't work, don't have call me, nothing. But I'd love to take it. Right.
Okay, I'll see what our schedule looks like. Hey, thank you. Your name's on here too?
Yeah.
Okay. So, awesome. Well, thank you. All right.
Yeah, this lady here told me about this, so I went to the website and I heard your TED talk. Very refreshing. Thank you for coming.
You would like what I said, have to say then, because I'm in the same place. Some of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very refreshing. And I'm consistent about this situation too.
Yeah.
Makes me separated. But I do my best to avoid religion.
Yeah.
And we have a slightly different perspective. Religion is great. Israel is not about religion.
And I read a lot about like how talking about and there's a great book by Sabrina Strings called Very Different Lives about how that's where
Yeah.
so I'm curious how you're going to write oh, native Christian stuff that makes the third.
So, yeah, so I'm writing this book basically as a way to say it's time we start asking the people who are indigenous to this land how to live here well.
Okay.
And so the book is really going to be about kind of blending, not rejecting scientific data, but saying without indigenous wisdom, scientific data really be incomplete. And then pointing to several ways, like, so the way I wade through all these books that are filled with study after study of scientific data and all this, I'm like, well, if I have to measure it against what indigenous groups have been saying. And so as I do this research, I found the yeah, so
Interesting.
I think that. So I've been doing it. Like, about all creationists, I thought our body, yeah, this is what strawberry tastes like.